Dad, Aunt, do you know who that surgery was actually for? The second I finished the sentence, New Year's dinner blew up in absolute silence. My dad went pale on the spot, his chopstick slipped from his hand and hit the table with a sharp clatter. My stepmom froze her soup spoon, still hanging in midair. My younger brother stared down at his plate, shaking like someone had just ripped open his darkest secret. All it took was one sentence. One sentence to tear down the perfect happy family facade they'd spent years building. One sentence to rip open the secret they were so sure I would never discover, the secret about the surgery money they had quietly spent on something else, something completely different from what they'd told me. And in that moment I knew, nothing in this family would ever go back to the way it was. Hi, I'm Lauren Parker, 34 years old. This happened during the holiday season last year. That day I flew from Aspen back to Vermont, where my family's wide wooden house nestled against a quiet hillside. Inside, the fireplace was still glowing, cold winter air drifted in from the porch, and the smell of roasted chicken spread through the kitchen, making everything feel warm and peaceful. Everyone sat around the table laughing, chatting, acting like nothing in the world could ever trouble them. I just sat there waiting for the exact moment when everyone had just taken a bite of food. Then I smiled as casually as possible and asked, "Dad, Emma, did you get the hospital's surgery appointment letter yet?" My dad and my stepmom exchanged a quick glance, then both laughed. Dad shrugged, completely unfazed. "Got it last week. But I used the money to throw Mason's 27th birthday party." "You only turned 27 once." The laughter around the table kept going like nothing serious had just been said. I set my fork down, lifted my head and looked at each of them, my voice cold enough to freeze the room. "It seems none of you actually know who that surgery was really for. Do you?" The entire room went silent. Just one single sentence and I turned a cheerful holiday dinner into a nightmare in under 3 seconds. If you've ever said something at a family gathering that made everyone choke, you know that feeling. My dad's face drained of all color. My stepmom sat frozen, and Mason stared down at his plate, silent to the point of suffocating. No one said another word for the rest of the night. The next morning, pale sunlight slipped through the wooden blinds in the living room, and I was still lying on the same sofa where I'd stayed frozen all night without a minute of sleep. The screen of my phone, still in my hand, was cracked from when it hit the floor the night before. I unlocked it, opened my banking app one more time, praying I had somehow misread the numbers. But no, my account balance was zero. Every last dollar of the $500,000 I had saved over so many years was gone without a trace. For 10 long years, I had carried this family on my back. Every paycheck I earned flowed into their lives, while I survived on instant noodles and exhausting overtime shifts. I paid Mason's tuition at the University of Colorado. I paid the down payment on his motorcycle when he turned 21. I paid the security deposit on the downtown luxury apartment so he could network. He handed out supplementary cards to his friends like free samples, and I never said no. Not once. Not ever. About 11 months earlier, Mason had gotten so drunk he had to crash at my place. He passed out on my sofa, snoring like thunder, and I noticed his wrist was swollen again. He kept insisting it was from some old sports injury, but my instincts told me otherwise. When he finally fell into a deep sleep, I used a home blood testing kit I bought online, drew 2 vials of blood and drove them myself to a private lab. 2 days later I got a call from Dr. Nathan Dean, my ex and the only specialist I trusted. His voice was heavy, almost breaking. "Lauren, Mason has advanced rheumatoid arthritis. He's in the golden window right now. If he starts treatment within the next 6 to 8 months, there's still a chance to prevent joint deformity. But once that window closes, it's a lifetime of disability and dependence on pain medication." I went completely numb hearing those words. I didn't tell anyone because I already knew exactly what would happen if I did. Mason would fall apart. My dad would dismiss it like it was nothing. And Emma, my stepmom, would turn the whole thing into a dramatic performance to get sympathy. So I did what I'd always done. I carried the burden alone. I created a trust fund under my name with Mason as the sole beneficiary, money that could be used only for his treatment. Every bonus, every bit of savings, every dollar I'd scraped together over the years, more than $500,000, I poured all of it into that fund. All of it. Just to make sure my little brother would have a future that didn't involve crutches or spending the rest of his life in bed. Because my job required constant travel, I added an emergency clause to the trust. If Mason ever needed urgent medical intervention, my dad or stepmom only had to call the bank to confirm, and I would send an approval email afterward. I never imagined they would actually use that clause, and I definitely never imagined how they would use it. I never thought they would ever use that emergency clause. But they did, and in a way I could never have imagined. Last week, while I was stuck in New York for a major project, Emma called the bank officer who managed my private account. She said word for word, "Lauren is overseas. Mason is in critical condition." She authorized me to handle everything. Then she sent a fake email identical to mine except for a single extra dot, just different enough to fool anyone who wasn't paying close attention. The banker saw the emergency clause, saw the confirmation email, heard Emma crying on the phone, and they released the entire trust fund in one transaction. Where did the money go? Not to a hospital, not to medication, not to treatment, but to Mason's 27th birthday party. A full mountain resort rented for 3 days, a famous indie band flown in from Los Angeles, private fireworks blasting across the hillside. Nearly 300 guests, half of them influencers who lived off Instagram photos, an all-night open bar run by a celebrity chef, ice sculptures, lighting rigs, a dance floor, live music, everything. I opened Mason's Instagram. His stories were still up. There he was, Mason lifted on his friend's shoulders, Mason popping champagne at sunrise on a balcony, Mason grinning under a neon sign that read, 27 and unstoppable. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Because the brother smiling in those videos had no idea that his entire future, his ability to walk, had just been burned to ashes for a party. Mason had absolutely no clue that the money lighting up his night with fireworks was supposed to save him from a wheelchair for the rest of his life. I stayed frozen until the sun climbed high, my phone finally dying in my lap. The same little brother I used to carry on my back when he was 5, was now on the verge of losing everything, all because our father and stepmother burned his last chance to ever live normally, for one meaningless weekend of noise and likes. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Something inside me just shut off. And that morning I made my decision. From now on, they're on their own. I'm done being their lifeline. The doorbell blasted through the silence at 2 a.m, sharp enough to slice the whole house in half. I knew exactly who it was before I even reached the door. I opened it. My father, Emma, and Mason stood there, the smell of alcohol and anger practically vibrating off them. Emma barged in first, clutching a thick stack of papers like a weapon. She didn't bother with a greeting. She shoved the documents toward my face. "You shut off all of Mason's cards, didn't you?" Her voice sliced through the night like a razor. She slammed the entire stack of statements onto my coffee table. Every single card got declined. He couldn't even pay for gas. My father was right behind her shouting. The payment on his motorcycle bounced. The repo company already tagged it. 2 days from now they're towing it. 2 days, Lauren. You fix this yourself. Mason stood slumped in the doorway, hoodie half-zipped, eyes bloodshot like he still hadn't sobered up. He looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. His voice trembled, "Sis. The leasing office put a 10-day pay or vacate notice on our apartment door. My roommates are freaking out. We're probably gonna end up homeless." He looked at me the same way he always did, the way someone looks at a firefighter right before the flames swallow them, expecting me to save him again. But that night, for the first time in my life, I finally saw who had really pushed them to this edge. And it wasn't me. Emma kept yelling, her voice climbing higher and sharper. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for them? His friends keep calling, asking why his cards don't work. He's 27, not some broke college kid. This is humiliating." My father jabbed a finger straight into my chest, each word like a nail. "You don't get to cut everything off like that. This house survives because of your money. It always has. You stop, we stop, that's the rule." Mason stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck, looking completely lost. "Lauren, just turn the cards back on. In 2 weeks I'll have a new sponsorship contract. I'll pay you back then. Seriously, just 2 weeks." I looked at each of them. 10 years flashed before my eyes. Those 3 a.m. phone calls begging for emergency transfers. Those flights I canceled so I could cover Mason's rent. Those birthdays, Christmases, graduations where I worked double just to keep the whole family afloat. I took one long, steady breath. No, just one word. But it cracked through the room like a gunshot. Emma's mouth dropped open. What did you just say? I said no. No more money, no more transfers, no more excuses. My father's face turned a deep, furious purple. You don't have the right to make that decision. You've supported this family since you were 20. That's your responsibility. You don't just walk away. I let out a short, cold laugh sharp as a blade. Responsibility? I'm not a walking ATM. Mason looked at me with those pleading eyes, the same eyes that always used to break me. Sis, please. I've got shoots coming up, sponsors waiting. If I show up like this, it's over. My career's done. Emma snatched up the stack of papers again and fanned them out in front of my face like she was dealing cards. Look at these balances. Look at what you've done to us. She spoke as if I were the one who had destroyed their lives, not the ones who burned through the money meant to save Mason's legs, in a single night of partying. Her voice sharpened every word, slicing like glass. Do you want your brother out on the streets? I didn't even bother touching the papers she was shoving at me. He's 27. He has a perfectly good degree. He bought a motorcycle he couldn't afford and lives in an apartment he's never paid a dime for. None of that is my problem anymore. My father stepped closer, his voice dropping into that icy tone that used to terrify me when I was a child. You think this ends here? You think we'll let you destroy everything this family has built? Emma cut in her eyes, narrowing into two thin blades. You have 24 hours to restore everything. Mason's cards, the bike payments, the apartment, all of it. If you don't, you'll learn exactly how far this family will go to protect itself. Mason just stared at the floor, shifting his feet, waiting, hoping I'd break the way I always had for the past 10 years. But not this time. I walked past them, threw the front door wide open and stood there blocking the exit. Your 24 hours start now. Get out of my house. The three of them froze as if waiting for me to smile and say it was a joke. But I didn't say another word. Emma clutched the stack of papers to her chest, muttering curses under her breath as she stormed out first. My father shot me a look sharp enough to melt steel. Mason hesitated the longest, then finally lowered his head and followed them out. The door closed. I slid the deadbolt shut, then pulled the security chain across. For the first time in 10 years, the house was completely silent. I stood in the dark hallway, heart pounding, waiting for that familiar wave of guilt to hit me, the guilt that had always dragged me back into saving them. But it didn't come. That afternoon, when I returned from work, a large yellow envelope was sitting neatly at my doorstep. No postage, no return address. Only my name printed boldly across the front, cold and final like a verdict. I brought it inside, tore it open, and my heart dropped. Inside was a notice of court acceptance, along with a petition to declare an individual legally incapacitated and to appoint a guardian, filed and signed by my father and Emma. My hands shook as I read it. Their attorney, Mr. Thomas Lane, had attached a long 4-part explanation, and every single paragraph hit me like a well-aimed punch. Section 1. They accused me of suddenly and without justification cutting off all financial support, causing the family to fall into severe hardship. Section 2. They claimed I showed signs of psychological instability, isolation, and unusually hostile behavior toward my relatives. Section 3. They alleged that I was no longer capable of managing my own assets and that I posed a risk of losing all personal property, supposedly endangering myself. Section 4. They requested that the court appoint my father and Emma as my legal guardians, granting them full control over my assets, my bank accounts, and every decision concerning my life. Attached to the petition were dozens of statements and witness reports, the kind you only needed to skim for a second to see how blatantly fabricated they were. I stood frozen in the living room, not because I feared the law, but because I couldn't believe my own father and stepmother. The people who had lived off my money for 10 straight years could invent lies, sign their names, and hand them to a court, just to take away my freedom. They didn't just want the money. They wanted control over my entire life. If I refused to sign, they planned to petition the court to declare me legally incapacitated and seize full guardianship, including the power to force psychiatric evaluations and remove my right to make my own medical decisions. Inside the envelope was even a pre-filled agreement with only the signature line left blank. They had even placed a tiny green arrow sticker pointing at it, as if all I had to do was sign away my life. I read the entire file 3 times, my hands shaking harder each time. They had attached every possible document to paint me as unstable. There were statements from neighbors claiming I rarely left the house and that I had been showing unusual behavior. There was a copy of my credit history showing that I had paid off every shared loan myself and removed everyone from my supplementary cards, and they twisted that into suspicious financial activity. There were screenshots of old messages I'd sent Mason pushing him to get a job, which they framed as hostile and aggressive. There was even a handwritten note from a therapist I had never met claiming she was concerned for my safety because I'd become cold and difficult to approach. And worst of all, they included a drafted emergency temporary order requesting the court freeze all accounts under my name immediately until a competency hearing could be held. I felt my blood turn to ice. I called the only person I knew who wouldn't fold under pressure, my attorney Hannah Miles, who had represented me in a labor dispute years earlier. She picked up on the second ring. "Lauren, breathe. Send me everything. Now." 20 minutes later, she called back, her tone sharp and serious. "They're filing for a competency petition. In this country, family members can request it if they claim someone can't manage their own affairs. That voluntary agreement they included. It's a trap. If you sign it, they gain full control over your assets, your accounts, your life." My voice shook. "And if I don't sign, they'll request an emergency order, asset freeze, mandatory psychiatric evaluation. And honestly, courts sometimes approve it, especially if the petitioners cry and play the victim. I've seen it happen." My heartbeat thudded in my ears. "Do they have a strong case? Weak. Very weak. But don't get complacent. They can inflate tiny details to make you look unstable. You need to act fast. Gather everything: bank statements, wire transfers, work records, anything proving you are functioning, sane, and employed. And most importantly," she paused, the silence heavy, "you must prove that they are the ones who emptied Mason's medical trust." I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles went white. For the first time, I realized my family didn't just want money, they wanted to take my freedom, my autonomy, and my voice. Hannah warned me to brace myself. Everything is about to get much uglier. That night I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by towering stacks of documents. I scanned page after page until the first hints of sunrise pushed through the window. Every time the thought crossed my mind, maybe I should just sign, end this nightmare. A different image flashed in my head: Mason popping open a champagne bottle he didn't pay for, and a wave of nausea snapped me out of my weakness. By morning I had made my choice. I would not sign, I would not beg. And I would not let them lock me in a psychiatric ward just so they could keep living off me. I prepared an envelope thicker than the one they'd sent me, addressed it to their attorney Thomas Lane, and dropped it into the mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper: "See you in court." That night Denver was brutally cold, fog swallowing the streetlights whole. I had just come back from the grocery store, my arms full of bags, when I saw another envelope taped to my door. One look at it and my stomach tightened. It was from my company's HR department. Before I even opened it, I knew it was bad. Inside was a single notice: immediate termination of employee medical benefits. Reason: multiple fraudulent medical claims exceeding $1 million. Attached were 7 itemized invoices, 3 emergency psychiatric admissions, 2 mandatory detox treatments, 2 suicide risk observation holds. All of them listed me as the patient. And every single form carried a digital signature identical to my real one. But in reality, I had never set foot in any of those facilities. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grab the wall to keep myself upright. I called the insurance hotline immediately, standing on my front porch while the cold mist soaked through my jacket. After 43 minutes on hold, an agent finally came on the line, her voice trembling as she read the file. "Ma'am, these reimbursement requests were submitted through the hospital's internal portal using your exact insurance number, your date of birth, and a digital signature that perfectly matches the one in your records. By law, we're required to suspend all your medical benefits until the investigation is complete." I stood there stunned. It wasn't just my bank accounts. It wasn't just the court petition. Now they had created an entire psychiatric medical record under my name. All to prove I was legally incapacitated, all to find an excuse to seize my assets and take away my freedom. Never in my life had I seen so clearly just how far my own family was willing to go to turn me into a voiceless puppet. The insurance agent added that legally, they had no choice but to freeze all my coverage until the investigation ended. I asked her to read the IP address that had submitted the fraudulent claims. She read the string of numbers one by one, and every single one led back to a place I knew by heart: my father and stepmother's old house, the house where I grew up. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Later that same night, at about 1:30 in the morning, someone pounded on my front door so hard the walls shook. I stepped quietly to the peephole. 2 police cruisers from the Denver precinct were parked in my driveway, red and blue lights flashing through the fog. I cracked the door open, and icy wind slapped me in the face. The female officer closest to me brushed wet snow off her shoulder and introduced herself. "I'm Detective Maya Brooks." She spoke quickly. "We received an emergency call from a family member saying you were attempting suicide inside your home." The caller reported screaming and the sound of glass breaking. "We're required to enter and verify your safety." My teeth chattered, not from the cold. I live alone. I was asleep." She nodded, the kind of nod you give when you've heard that exact sentence 100 times before. When a report includes that level of detail, protocol requires us to conduct a full welfare check. "This will only take a minute." I stepped aside. 2 officers walked in their boots, leaving streaks of icy water across my hardwood floor. They opened every cabinet, checked under the bed, swept flashlights through the bathroom, even pulled open the drawers under the sink, searching for poison or sharp objects. One officer spoke into his radio. "Subject is alert, unharmed, unarmed, and shows no signs of self-harm." Detective Brooks handed me a medical transport refusal form. I signed it, my handwriting trembling. As they stepped back toward the door, she paused, studying me for a long moment before asking softly, "Do you want to tell me who's trying to push you to this point?" I let out a laugh, a painful, hollow sound that scraped my lungs. "My parents." She didn't look surprised. Not even a little. Just a slow, knowing nod. As if she'd seen far too many cases like mine, and understood that this kind of cruelty rarely comes from strangers. Detective Brooks didn't blink. "We get these false reports a lot. Most of them turn out to be fabricated." She handed me a business card. "If they try anything again, call me directly. I'll notify the patrol unit about your situation." When the police lights finally disappeared into the fog, I just stood there in the doorway, letting the freezing wind hit me until my fingertips went numb. Then I shut the door, slid every lock into place, and even dragged a chair under the doorknob as if they might come back any second to break it down. I opened my laptop and logged into my insurance portal. My premium coverage flashed red across the screen, canceled under fraud investigation, over $1 million in fabricated medical claims, a fabricated suicide report at 1:30 in the morning, a police welfare check triggered by lies. They weren't even pretending anymore. They wanted me to break, right now. I curled up on the sofa, my jacket still wet, droplets falling onto the old carpet. The house was silent except for the wind whistling through the loose window panes. And for the first time since I cut them off, a crushing loneliness hit me like an avalanche. No one was coming to save me. No one even believed I needed saving. I stayed on that sofa until the sky outside turned the dull gray of dishwater. In my hand, Detective Brooks' business card was clenched so tightly it left deep marks across my palm. One warm afternoon in April, while I was pushing a grocery cart out of the supermarket, a man in a wrinkled suit stepped directly into my path. He handed me a thick white envelope stamped with the red seal of the Colorado Superior Court, the corners lifting slightly in the wind. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. A summons, a competency hearing for Lauren Parker. Hearing date, 9 o'clock in the morning, April 28th. Location, courtroom. 2 Colorado Superior Court Presiding Judge Honorable Allison Grant. As I held the envelope, my heart dropped straight to the floor. My own family dragged me into the Colorado Superior Court, claiming I was mentally incompetent, all so they could legalize taking control of my money and my life. I stood alone in my dark house, listening to the wind howl against the windows like grieving voices. No one was coming to save me. No one believed I was innocent. And just when I thought I couldn't take another blow, a worse one hit. The very next morning, I got a call from a courier saying there was a direct court delivery for me. I ran to the gate, signed for it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. The envelope was so thick I had to tear it open with both hands. This wasn't just another accusation. This was the kill shot. They wanted to bury me legally. I carried the heavy file back toward my car, feeling like every step sank deeper into mud. I knew then, this wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a battle for my freedom. When I opened the packet, I understood just how far they had prepared for this. I gripped the red-sealed court document until the edges dug into my palm. It felt like the ground beneath me was sliding away piece by piece. So this was it. They had gone all the way, faking psychiatric records, creating fraudulent medical files, triggering a midnight police raid, and now dragging me into court to strip me of every legal right I had. No more ambush attacks. This was a full frontal assault meant to bring me to my knees. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands ice cold. But when the engine started, something sharp and fierce rose inside me, not fear but a clarity as sharp as a blade. If they wanted to fight dirty, then I would fight with the truth. I hit the gas and drove straight to Hannah Miles' law office. If anyone was capable of pulling me out of this nightmare, it was her. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from her. Hannah read through the file so fast I couldn't even track her eyes as they moved down each page. Then she snapped the folder shut and looked directly at me. "Lauren, you're being played in the dirtiest case I've seen in 10 years of practice. But don't worry, I'm taking this." I almost collapsed from relief. Hannah stood, her tone firm and final. "We need to get to Colorado Springs immediately. This hearing cannot happen without you. You have 1 hour to pack, then we're flying out." I nodded without thinking. All I knew was that if I stayed in Denver one more night, my family would land another blow meant to break me. We rushed to Denver International Airport, my heart pounding like footsteps chasing right behind me. The last flight of the day had exactly 2 seats left. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at Denver fading under the orange glow of sunset. It felt like I was leaving behind an entire old life, flying straight into the battle that would decide my future. When the plane landed in Colorado Springs, heavy rain hammered the runway. Hannah opened her umbrella, cast me a small confident smile and said, "Tomorrow we fight." I gripped the handle of my bag, took a steady breath and stepped into the storm waiting for me. The wheels of the plane touched down with a soft jolt at Peterson Airfield, snapping me out of the restless daze I'd been in the entire flight. The sky over Colorado Springs was a solid sheet of gray drizzle, streaks of rain slashing across the window, like someone sketching frantically over the clouds. I stood lifting the folder Hannah told me to hold as if it were my lifeline. She walked beside me with quick, determined steps, her focus so intense that not even the rain dared touch her resolve. "From this moment on you cannot shake," Hannah whispered, the way someone speaks to a soldier right before sending them into battle. We took a taxi straight into the city center. Colorado Springs at daybreak was soaked, neon signs still dark, but the honking cars and the smell of hot street food rising from a corner stall made it feel like the whole city was waking up for a storm it didn't even know was coming from. Courtroom 2. When the courthouse appeared through the rain, stern, cold, towering like a slab of gray stone, my heartbeat thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Hannah placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Remember this, they only win if you're afraid. Stand firm and they lose." I inhaled deeply and stepped inside. The smell of damp tile and the echo of footsteps bounced through the hallway like war drums guiding me toward the courtroom. A clerk opened the door. "Guardianship petition hearing. All parties please enter." I stepped through the threshold. The hearing began. Attorney Lane rose first, his voice sweet as syrup but sharp underneath. "Your Honor, we are simply trying to save our daughter from her own deterioration." Hannah stood immediately, cutting him off before he could add another word. "Your Honor, this is not an act of care. This is a calculated scheme to seize her assets built entirely on fabricated evidence and fraud. We request the court dismiss the petition and refer the entire case for criminal investigation." Judge Grant narrowed her eyes, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "Miss Miles, I see mention of an additional witness in your filing. Call them." Hannah nodded softly, but with the force of silence that swallowed the entire room. The respondent calls, "Dr. Benjamin Hart." A side door opened. Dr. Benjamin Hart stepped in sleek black suit, crisp shirt, a thick red folder in his hand. He didn't look at me as he walked past, but just before he sat down, his eyes met mine for half a second, steady, regretful, but resolute. He raised his hand, was sworn in, then took the witness seat. Hannah began softly, too softly, the kind of soft that hides a blade. "Dr. Hart, could you tell the court what your relationship is with Mason?" He answered each word clear and controlled. I am the specialist who diagnosed Mason's condition. The entire courtroom rippled with shock. Emma lurched halfway out of her seat. Objection, that is private medical. Bang. Judge Grant's gavel cracked through the room. Overruled. Witness will continue. Dr. Hart opened the red folder. The sound of the pages turning was so sharp it made my heartbeat stutter. 11 months ago, he said calmly, I confirmed that Mason had advanced rheumatoid polyarthritis progressing rapidly. Without biological therapy within the first year, the risk of permanent disability is nearly certain. A few people behind me gasped. Dr. Hart continued, Mason's family was never informed. Because his sister Lauren handled all treatment arrangements herself. He lifted a page and projected it onto the courtroom screen. Bank statements, the treatment trust I had created, the $500,000 I had saved over 10 years. Then he turned another page, his voice steady, unwavering. This is the forged email authorizing the withdrawal. This is the transaction emptying the entire medical trust. He turned again. This is the invoice for the luxury villa rental. This is the fireworks receipt. And this is the list of paid performers, mostly TikTok influencers. The courtroom erupted. Everything my father and Emma had tried to hide was being peeled back layer by layer, exposed under the brightest possible light. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles had turned white. For the first time, the truth wasn't twisted. It wasn't buried, silenced, or distorted. It stood in the center of the courtroom, alive, undeniable. My father's face drained to the color of ash, and Emma clutched the edge of the table so hard her knuckles matched mine. Doctor. Hart continued, his tone cold and methodical, every word hitting them like a hammer. The treatment window closed 4 months ago. Mason now faces a lifetime risk of disability and dependence on heavy pain medication. That money was his only chance. Mason yanked off his headphones, leapt to his feet and shouted, What are you talking about? Dr. Hart turned to him, meeting his eyes without hesitation. Your parents used your entire medical trust to throw you a birthday party. Money meant to save your legs. Mason's mouth fell open, closed, then opened again, completely unable to process what he'd just heard. He turned to Emma, his face as pale as bone. Mom. But Emma only stared down at the table, unable to meet her son's eyes for even a second. Attorney Miles stepped forward and placed 2 thick binders in front of Judge Grant. 11 witness statements submitted by my father's side and 3 retractions where the same witnesses admitted they had been paid 12 million dong each to sign lies. Attorney Lane shot up, desperate. Your Honor. Bang. The gavel cracked through the room. Judge Grant didn't even look at him. Silence. I am reading. The air thickened. Rain hammered the courthouse roof like a war drum. She turned each page slowly, deliberately, every sentence, every stamp, every signature. The tension was so dense no one dared breathe. 8 minutes passed, 8 minutes that felt like a verdict suspended above all our heads. Judge Grant lifted her head, eyes sharp as steel. Her voice rang through the courtroom, each word landing with the force of a hammer, so strong the entire room fell still. After reviewing all presented evidence, this court finds no basis to conclude that the respondent lacks legal capacity. The guardianship petition filed by Mr. Andrew Parker and Mrs. Emma Parker is wholly unfounded, submitted with malicious intent and supported by organized falsification. It was as if my father had been slapped across the face. Emma clutched the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. But the judge wasn't finished. Her tone grew colder, more final. The court hereby dismisses the petition in its entirety. Furthermore, Mr. Parker and Mrs. Parker are ordered to pay all court fees and fully reimburse the respondent's legal expenses. She paused, exactly 1 beat of silence. The kind of silence that presses the air out of the room. Outside, rain slammed against the windows like it was urging the next blow to fall. And then Judge Grant delivered it, each syllable dropping like a verdict carved in stone. Additionally, all case materials are to be forwarded to the Colorado State Bureau of Investigation for review of potential charges, including fraudulent acquisition of assets, forgery, and coordinated perjury. No one moved. No shouts. No excuses. The room exploded into horrified whispers, and my father and Emma went rigid, stone still, realizing everything they had built to destroy me had collapsed right in front of them. And this time, it wouldn't be me knocking on their door. It would be law enforcement. Mason sank into his chair, burying his head in his hands, whispering something no one could hear. Is this my fault? No, it wasn't. But at last, the truth had landed where it needed to. A court officer stepped in just as the final strike of the gavel echoed. Judge Grant looked squarely at my father and Emma, her final words closing the door on their scheme forever. This hearing is concluded. Officers escort the petitioners out of the courtroom. My father staggered to his feet, his legs trembling so violently he could barely stand. Emma burst into sobs, covering her face, her composure shattered. As for Mason, he sat frozen, staring at the screen where the fireworks invoice still glowed, the party that had stolen the future of his own legs. Dr. Benjamin Hart stepped down from the witness stand, and before leaving he gave me a small nod, quiet, steady, apologetic but ready. Somehow, that tiny gesture was enough to keep me standing after everything that had just happened. I stayed in my seat as the courtroom emptied. Rain slammed against the windows like it was trying to break through the walls. Only then did I finally feel my breath return deep and full, like I hadn't taken a real one in years. They had lost. And for the first time I felt like I could truly breathe. Mason's first wave of pain hit in June. By August he couldn't hold a cup of coffee. By October he needed a walker. In just 4 months his doctors moved him from mild painkillers to the strongest medication allowed, fentanyl, something normally reserved for patients on the verge of permanent disability. At 28, Mason was officially approved for disability benefits. That tiny monthly check became his entire income, aside from the occasional odd job he tried to complete before his hands locked up completely. My father and Emma lasted exactly 91 days after the verdict. Court fees and the attorney payments they were required to cover totaled more than 3 billion dong, an amount they never had. They sold everything they could, but it wasn't enough. And so just last week, right before the new year, the wooden house I grew up in was seized by the bank. I watched them load their last boxes into a rented truck, and all I felt was nothing. No anger, no pity, no hatred, just a hollow space where all those feelings used to live. They left me dozens of voicemails, long and desperate, but I didn't listen to a single one. In January I listed my house in Denver. It sold in 6 days to a young couple who wanted a mountain retreat. I used the money to wipe out the final student loan of my life. Then I closed every joint account, removed my name from anything tied to my old family, and severed every last thread that bound me to them. Finally I bought a one-way ticket, no return date, no forwarding address. No more chains. And as the plane lifted off the runway, leaving behind the mountains, the courthouse, the funerals of relationships I once tried so hard to save, I understood something with a clarity sharper than any pain I'd ever felt. Freedom isn't the cloud, absence of responsibility. Freedom is choosing which responsibilities don't get to own you anymore. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't someone's provider, someone's lifeline, someone's walking wallet. I was just me, whole, untethered, breathing. And sometimes that alone is a miracle. Colorado, the place I once believed I'd be trapped in forever, grew smaller and smaller beneath the plane's wing. I moved to a new city, started a new job, rented a tiny apartment, and even changed my phone number. At that new job, I began introducing myself by my middle name, Lan, as if to remind myself every day that I had stepped into a different life, a life no one else controlled, a life no longer bound by fear, and most importantly, a life that finally belonged to me. The day I finalized the sale of my house fell right on the first warm spell of March. I drove up to the mountains one last time, rolled the windows down, and let the wind carry away the memories I no longer needed. The hills looked exactly the same, mist stretching across the valley, cherry blossoms just beginning to open. I turned onto the gravel road leading to the house I grew up in. The mailbox had been replaced. The wooden porch swing was gone. Someone had repainted the front door, a bright sea green covering the old forest green paint that had peeled in long strips for years. I walked inside, moving slowly through each room like flipping through pages of an old diary. My childhood bedroom was staged with generic wall art and a bed that wasn't mine. I placed the keys on the kitchen counter beside the final set of closing documents, then locked the door behind me, no looking back, no hesitation. Standing on the front porch, I looked out one last time at the mountains that had raised me. Somewhere in that valley, Mason was probably struggling through another day, carrying pain he never deserved. Somewhere else in town, my father and Emma were learning how to survive without someone to cling to. And strangely, I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel guilty. I just felt done. I got into my car, lowered the window all the way, and let the mountain wind hit my face one last time. Then I drove east, watching the peaks shrink in the rearview mirror until they disappeared completely, like a chapter that had finally irrevocably closed. And here's what I understand now. What I wish someone had told me when I was 24, carrying everyone else's world on my shoulders. Family is not a blank check. Family is not a lifetime subscription you are obligated to renew with your own exhaustion. And the moment you turn someone else's crisis into your duty, you've signed the sentence for your own future. If you're breaking your back, paying the light bills, the rent, the life expenses of people who don't appreciate you, remember this. You were not born to raise children who aren't yours. You are not responsible for keeping the lights on for people who would watch your house go dark without blinking. You have the right to stop. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to choose yourself without becoming the villain in anyone else's story. Because the people who truly love you would never let things get this far. That house now belongs to someone else. Those mountains are now the backdrop to another family's life. And me? I've never slept as peacefully as I do now. At 34, I finally understand freedom isn't the absence of attachments. Freedom is the courage to cut loose the ones that are slowly killing you. When the plane landed, I stepped onto the runway, feeling like someone entirely new. No more weight on my shoulders, no more fear in my chest, no one standing behind me waiting to drain me dry. Just me, on my own, but at peace. And sometimes that alone is a miracle.